Could we see Justin Jefferson on the Cincinnati Bengals? We're doing best landing spots for wide receivers on the trade block on today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Let's roll.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tyler Rowland, local expert from the Locked On Titans podcast. Here with my co-host, Alex Clancy, local expert from Locked On Cardinals. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We're talking wide receivers and all things wide receivers on a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Some wide receivers who might get traded in the near future. What would be their best landing spot? And new wide receivers who just changed teams during free agency. Who's the best fit, the worst fit? And then finally, could Marvin Harrison Jr. really be slipping in the NFL draft? We're going to get into all of that. Before we do, thank you for making the Locked On NFL show your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, NFL content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On NFL. But Alex, we are going to start with a heavy hitter. And I know the Vikings have come out publicly and said that Justin Jefferson will not be traded. But of course, that's what they're going to say publicly. We've seen them trade Randy Moss. We've seen them trade Stephon Diggs. I'm not putting it past the Minnesota Vikings to trade their number one wide receiver. If you could think of a perfect landing spot for Justin Jefferson in a trade, what would be your pick?
Just let's let the wheels fall off and go to the team you were closest to growing up, the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, do you want to have those cryptic tweets? Not cryptic, because cryptic can't be like positive joking can't be cryptic. And it can't be cryptic if it's coming from a different player who happened to play with Justin Jefferson on arguably the best offense that college football has ever seen in Jamar Chase. If they're going to have that void that T. Higgins was going to fill with money, and you want to give it to Justin Jefferson, that's going balls to the wall. You're drafting rookie running backs. You're giving running backs $11 to play for you, and you're throwing the ball 50 times a game. Because here's the thing. Minnesota, I think they made their decision on Justin Jefferson when they let Kirk Cousins walk. They could have given Kirk Cousins more money, I'm sure. But I feel like drafting Justin Jefferson and drafting J.J. McCarthy and having Justin Jefferson there doesn't compute. And it's interesting you bring that up about Randy Moss and Stephon Diggs. I forgot Randy, like I knew, but I forgot. And it's something that's interesting. And remember, we had this, okay? The fact that he didn't sign an extension before the beginning of last season, that was it. And then he got hurt again. Like, it's not like Justin Jefferson has played every game in the NFL. He's missed multiple games in a couple different seasons. So I think that probably has something to do with their decision, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're the Bengals and you've seen what works for you, Burrow having two outstanding wide receivers, you can get as far as the Super Bowl with that. I think you would have to push all in if they really had the opportunity to do that. So that's why I brought it up at the beginning. What an insane fit. As a secondary fit, I will say, though, Buffalo could make some sense. I mean, obviously, we've seen the Stephon Diggs trade. We've seen him maybe make some noise on social media lately. He's gotten older. If Buffalo made some sort of change where they can move Stephon Diggs out, move Justin Jefferson in, of course, they would love to do that. But
before we move on really quick, I do want to ask you this because Justin Jefferson is going to get quarterback money or thinks
it's going to be crazy.
This is the question. And we can do this over the summer because some of our best content is over the summer when there's nothing to talk about. We just have to use our brains to come up with stuff. Is it going to be the rookie scale window to win with a quarterback, with a wide receiver that you draft, just like it is with a quarterback? We're seeing that
expensive wide receivers are getting.
Top wide receivers rarely get paid by the team that drafted them.
Right.
Like Deebo Samuel's an outlier. A.J. Brown didn't get paid by the team that drafted him. I think DK Metcalf did. But this could be a trend where some wide receivers who are top of their class don't get paid by the team that drafted them because they're ready to move on and draft a younger and a cheaper option.
Well, it's all supply and demand. So if there are a ton of great wide receivers coming out of the draft every year, like we're seeing this year, why would you pay $30 million instead of just drafting a guy? And we're seeing some teams make that decision in recent years. Another team that might be making that decision is the San Francisco 49ers with Brandon Ayuk. And he said something on Twitter here recently. Brandon Ayuk hasn't tweeted in like years. And then all of a sudden he comes out and he tweets, hey, at Coach Mike Tomlin, people say we look alike, because that's a joke that's been going around social media lately. I think Brandon Ayuk with the Steelers. You got the big-bodied receiver in George Pickens, who's like the tall guy, the physical guy, win contested catches, jump over people. And then you have Brandon Ayuk as the route runner over the middle and the intermediate areas with Russell Wilson and maybe Justin Fields, depending on how that all shakes out. I think that would be a good move for the Steelers to make, and going from NFC to AFC, I think would make the San Francisco 49ers feel better about it. What do you think for Brandon Ayuk?
The latter part is true, but since Antonio Brown left, that's where wide receivers go to die. Pittsburgh's not a pass-heavy team. Since Ben's been gone, even with Russell
Wilson. They did
Wilson.
Just change offensive coordinators. They got a quarterback they probably trust now. They'll probably throw the ball more.
Do you think that 60 years of history saved that Antonio Brown 2 or 3 years where Big Ben decided I'm going to throw the ball 40 times a game? Is they run the ball, they play defense. That's what Pittsburgh does.
Right.
And I feel like that his talents would be lost. He's probably the most underrated receiver in football now that DJ Moore is getting his flowers in Chicago. All he does is put up yards. All he does is catch the ball. All he does is go across the middle or outside or whatever you need him to do, and he scores touchdowns. I think he needs to go to a high-powered offense. Like, I don't know where that would be, but he could legitimately be a top 5 or top 7 receiver if he didn't have Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle on his team. But I don't think he's going to get I don't think he'd be happy in Pittsburgh. I just don't. I don't think that the targets are going to be there. Russ can throw the ball 22, 23 times a game. Like, I just don't see that.
And they have Arthur Smith as their offensive coordinator, so I understand the skepticism there. I know that there's been some connection with Brandon Ayuk in Jacksonville. Now that they're looking to replace Calvin Ridley, that would make some sense. But I think a team that could take a chance on him is Washington. The Commanders are going to need a top-flight number 1 wide receiver. Terry McLaurin's probably a number 2. Jahan Dotson's a good number 3. They have a ton of cap space. They haven't really done anything too flashy. You get Brandon Ayuk. They have draft capital. You pair him with your number 2 drafted quarterback. Adam Peters was in San Francisco, so there's that connection between the front offices. I think Washington could make some sense. But finally, we have T. Higgins. And that's probably the wide receiver out of these 3 that's the most likely to get traded. We know that he's put in a trade request. If you could think of a perfect landing spot for T. Higgins right now, what would it be?
Jeez, man. I mean, there's so many, like, the thing with him that's tough is how much do you pay him? Like, this isn't something where it's just easy. He's a wide receiver 2. Do you value him as a wide receiver 1? If so, you're probably going to have to give a second-round pick and pay him $28 million a year. Like, is he more important to a team than DK Metcalf? Is he more important to a team than AJ Brown? Is he more important to a team than Deebo Samuel? Like, is he more important than those guys? Or is he a Christian Kirk? Christian Kirk got $90 million. I know it was, whatever it was, 40, whatever guaranteed, 30, whatever guaranteed. But that's the first question. And then you can decide, like, is he going to a team to be a wide receiver 1, Tyler? Or is he going to be a wide receiver 2?
Well, I think he needs to go to a team that needs wide receivers. That's why I think like Baltimore could make some sense, because they have Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. Neither of them are a big physical wide receiver who's going to win contested catches and do all that. Maybe a team like the Panthers, who they can't really get their hands on a number 1 wide receiver right now because they gave away their pick. So maybe they go out and they get T. Higgins and they have the money to pay him and they let him try to be their number 1. I think there are some good fits out there, whether he's the number 1 or not. What if Green Bay wanted to be like, you know what? We got these young guys. They're good. Can we trust Christian Watson? We know Romeo Doubs is good. Xavier Hutchinson's in there. What if we go out and get a guy right now for Jordan Love and see if we can have a contested catch guy down the field? I think those would all be options for Higgins.
Do you think there's any chance that he stays in Cincinnati?
I think playing on a 1-year deal in Cincinnati, we've talked about this when we did the tag and the trade and the extend games and all of that. I think having a last dance year with Cincinnati as they try to keep Burrow healthy and make one more push to the Super Bowl before they inevitably got to let Higgins go, I think that would be a pretty good outcome for all parties involved. But with that said, we are going to move forward, talk about the wide receivers who actually did change teams in free agency. What are the best fits that we've seen? What are the worst fits? We're going to talk about that. Before we get into it, though, Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney, whether you're betting on a big upset or you're sticking with a number one seed. It's time to go dancing on America's number one sportsbook, FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 you can use on point spreads, money lines, who's going to win it all. You can bet on the Final Four, all of that different stuff. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's LOCKEDON and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Alex, we're going to continue today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We're talking about wide receivers all day long. We talked about some potential wide receiver trades. Now I want to talk about the wide receivers who actually did switch teams in free agency, the best and worst fits we saw. We'll finish out the show talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. potentially slipping in the NFL draft and just how silly it
I'll
actually
take the lead
is.
on that.
Right,
Okay.
right. Before we continue the show, though, do want to ask you guys this question. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Every day.
Alex, we saw some big wide receiver movement. I'm going to not only include the free agent signings, but any wide receiver trades that we saw as well in this discussion. If you could pick out one wide receiver move that's happened so far throughout the free agency period, free agency signing or trade, that you think is the best fit that you saw, what would it be?
Surprised myself with this answer. Partially because I'm not sure the wide receiver signings and trades went to that great of fits. Like, I don't understand. Calvin Ridley in Tennessee, I know you're closer with that. I mean, that's putting a lot of pressure on a second-year quarterback who's shown some, but not all the way that would garner, giving that guy all that money. I think I'm going to go with my old adage for every Darius. You know this one. It's Patrick Mahomes until it's not Hollywood Brown. And I think for a couple different reasons. One, even though in Arizona, he never really lived up to what he had injuries towards the tail end of last year. Kyler Murray tore his ACL at the end, in 2022. So the second half of that season was kind of a wash. Didn't really do a whole lot in Baltimore except for that. Did he have 3 touchdowns in the first quarter against Miami, his first game where they put up a 70 burger? I think when Minka Fitzpatrick was calling his agent saying, "Get me out of here" after 1 week. I think because of the money, okay, he didn't get a whole lot. I think because it's Patrick Mahomes, and I think because he can catch the football, they had dropsy doodles all day last year. MVS, Mecole Hardman when he came back, like they had problems at the wide receiver position. The fact they won a Super Bowl last year was miraculous. That may have been the best year for them. Having a bona fide guy who's gotten wide receiver 1 targets to be able to stretch the field, whether it be in the slot or outside, all Patrick Mahomes is going to have to do is throw the ball 50 yards down the field, and Hollywood Brown can still beat more than 51% of the corners out there in safety. So I think that's just a home run, especially with the low impact that it's going to have towards the salary cap.
And let's just take the low-hanging fruit here. His speed may not be on the same level, but it's the closest that they've come to Tyreek Hill, having a guy like Tyreek Hill since Tyreek Hill left. And some may say Hollywood Brown has drop issues of his own, but who has the most drops in the NFL over the last 5 years? Tyreek Hill. So, I mean, yeah, it's dude, if you look at the top 5 wide receivers in drops the last 5 years, it's like DK Metcalf, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, Deontay Johnson. Like, it's some of the best wide receivers.
They also get the most targets.
Deebo Samuel. Yeah. So, I'm not saying drops don't matter, but drops are a little overrated. You need to produce. You could take a couple of drops here and there. Drops aren't a killer for you if you have a healthy offense. It's not going to ruin you, especially if you guys have guys that make plays. So Hollywood Brown was actually my number one too. So
really?
for argument's sake, I'll defend the Calvin Ridley signing. I think it is a good fit for the Titans. I think when you have a second-year quarterback like Will Levis, who it's fair to be on the fence about right now, you need to put him in the most healthy environment possible so you can figure out whether it's him, or not. Because a lot of these young quarterbacks, there's like Justin Fields. The debate rages on right now in Chicago of they didn't give him a good enough situation. How do you know if he's good or not? The Titans went through that with Marcus Mariota too. People said, oh, you didn't help him enough. How can you know if he's good or not? Blah, blah, blah. You gave up on him too soon, all that. Well, the Titans are not letting that happen with Will Levis. They're going to put all their resources in to the offensive line and wide receiver and make it as best as possible. So I would defend it for that reason alone. But, yeah, I'm with you on Hollywood Brown. As for the worst fit, I'll lead us off here. I think it's Gabe Davis.
Yeah.
I really hate what Jacksonville did with the Gabe Davis signing because they let Calvin Ridley go. They used Calvin Ridley as an X wide receiver all year last year when Calvin Ridley is more of a Z wide receiver and movement wide receiver role. So they signed Gabe Davis with the intention of him being their X wide receiver, their big physical boundary wide receiver. So they could move Calvin Ridley back to that motion wide receiver role where he would be better suited. Well, you nailed in Gabe Davis, but if you don't have Calvin Ridley to do the second step of that plan and you just take one step, well, now you're just paying Gabe Davis $13 million a year when he's your number one wide receiver. And I think that's absolutely miserable. What a deflating thing for Jacksonville. What a downfall. I think that Gabe Davis, honestly, is no different to me than an Allen Lazard. He's just Lazard with better publicity and Josh Allen instead of Aaron Rodgers last year. I just don't think Gabe Davis is a special player at all. I think he's a third-tier wide receiver, not even a second-tier wide receiver. And I think Jacksonville played a dangerous game and they got burnt. So I'm going to say Gabe Davis.
Yeah, that was mine too. I mean, I think that he's living off of – because he had a stretch a couple years ago where he had that – remember when – Torrey Smith just absolutely jumped onto the scene during free agency, I think, or during preseason. He had 3 touchdowns in a game, and then it transferred over for a portion of one season, and he kind of lived off that the rest of his career. It's the same kind of thing with Gabe Davis. But Gabe Davis did, in the brightest of lights, he scored the go-ahead touchdown against the Chiefs with 14 seconds left. After scoring a touchdown earlier that game, he was the go-to touchdown guy for Josh Allen. So he has produced at the highest level. But you're looking at it from a small sample size during playoff games where it's one and done. It's kind of a circumstantial thing where it's an exception to the rule more than it's not for guys who are secondary receivers like him. And now you're doing a Christian Kirk thing again where it's like, let's see if he can produce. Christian Kirk at least is a ball hawk. He can catch the ball 9 or 10 times a game. He can run all over the field. Gabe Davis is kind of a go route guy, and you got to see if he can produce. Now, here's the thing. The only thing I have an issue with Jacksonville is they don't have a go-to receiver anymore.
Right.
Like they don't have a one
at
all. Like Evan Ingram is probably their most, reliable pass catcher. So that's Jacksonville is potentially the most poorly run organization now in the NFL.
Well, they played a dangerous game. They didn't want to pay the second-round pick to the Falcons by re-signing Calvin Ridley before free agency, so they rolled the dice and let him go to the market so that they could make it a third-round pick. Now they got to pay the third-round pick anyway, and they don't get him, and he went to a division rival. So call it what it is. I also just want to honorable mention Jerry Jeudy. I like the trade that the Browns made, but then giving Jerry Jeudy 3 years, $58 million, like Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore level money. I mean, that for a guy who's never had 1,000 yards in his career, that's a dangerous game, but not as bad. I think we're going to see Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah.
We're going to see these guys all get paid here in the next 6 months to a year, and it's going to make a lot of these contracts not look so bad anyway. But with that being said, Marvin Harrison Jr. slipping in the draft, I have the perfect person to have a Marvin Harrison Jr. related conversation.
Me?
His name is Alex Clancy, the host of Locked On Cardinals. We're going to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. not working out at the Ohio State Pro Day, what the recent buzz has been, and how far he could slip, if at all. Before we get into that, though.
This episode of Locked On NFL Thursday is brought to you by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. I mean, Tyler's got 3 jobs. I've got 2. We're both consistently working, between 14 and 16-hour days. We love it. but that's just the nature of the beast. And, you wish you had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? And the best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you most so you can do more of it. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. Switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. They make it very, very easy. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Final segment here, Alex Clancy, Locked on Cardinals, Tyler Rowland, Locked on Titans. We make up Locked on NFL Thursday. Got there. Thanks for making Locked on NFL your first listen free wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Marvin Harrison Jr. did not participate in the Combine. He then, yesterday, did not participate in Ohio State's Pro Day. And here's the thing. I actually did a segment on Locked on Cardinals about this yesterday morning. If you want to check that out, you're welcome to. Selfless plug. Or shameless plug. Here's the thing. The layman, very easy way to say this is, who cares? That's one. Okay. The thing that I'm going to defend, and then Tyler can take over here, is this isn't a diva approach. This isn't an ego approach. That is the laziest way to look at the direction that Marvin Harrison took, which will inevitably end up as a top 5 pick. Okay, either 4 or 5 or maybe 6, but that's not going to happen. This is a young gentleman. His dad played in the NFL, who's had injuries of his own. There is zero recourse for having a freak injury in a position you shouldn't have put yourself in to begin with. I completely understand this. And on top of all of that, barring any sort of unforeseen freakish event on Thursday night in the round 1 of the draft, there's only 2 teams that are going to draft this guy. So it doesn't matter. It's going to be the Cardinals. It's going to be the Chargers. That's it. Unless, you got your Jets, you got your Daniel Jeremiah going nutty balls all over the place with trade ups and the Jets and the Cardinals and all that stuff going scorched earth like he wanted to rise. And he said that on Twitter. He just wanted to make a whole rise about, for everybody. Only 2 teams are going to draft him. It doesn't matter at all. He doesn't have to show 1 iota more than he's shown during his 2.5 years of competitive football in college. That's it. And this isn't a lazy way to say it where it's like, let him do whatever he wants. He's going to be the next one. He's going to be Jamar Chase went and did his pro day. Jamar Chase sat out an entire year. Okay? Like, this is not the same. And he is not any other receiver. He has the potential to be the most transcendent receiver we've seen in a while. Let him sit, and he doesn't have to show anything else. Tyler, I would assume that you agree with me here. I mean, you and I are very... with things like this, be rational. Who cares? Get drafted 5th overall or 4th overall. You're muted. You're muted. Tyler?
Yes. So I do agree with you. Yeah. I do agree with you. And I think that it would be the first people who are the ones harping on Marvin Harrison Jr. here would be the first in line to say that he's an idiot if he happened to get hurt. They would be the first people to do that. So for me, I'm with you. Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't have to do all those things. What I find more interesting is and there's some conversation that teams told him not to work out because they don't care. Mm-hmm. So that's something to consider too here. But we've heard a lot of Malik Neighbors buzz, whether it be Daniel Jeremiah, John Ledyard, Dane Brugler. A lot of these draft nicks have been talking, and Malik Neighbors may actually go before Marvin Harrison Jr. My question to you is, Alex, is a guy who's sitting in the number 4 overall slot.
You want to ask me?
Are you taking Marvin Harrison Jr. or are you taking Malik Neighbors?
Marvin Harrison Jr.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a question. But for the Cardinals, it's do you make a pick at 4 or do you take 11, 23 and a 2025 1 to move back to 11? That's the conversation. I'm taking Marvin Harrison. Here's the thing. The biggest This is an Ohio State quarterback problem. This is a run-first offense, Big Ten, boring-ass football problem. Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze both played in two of the most high-powered offenses in college football last year. Oregon's there. There's a couple other teams. LSU is putting a 60-burger up every week. Jaden Davis had 7 total touchdowns every week. That's the only reason why he won the Heisman. They weren't a very good team. They were ranked 3 or 4 times, and they would drop out. Ranked, drop out. So we got to see what it looked like at his best. Marvin Harrison Jr. had to claw for all 1,400 or whatever, 1,300 of those yards and 12 touchdowns. The quarterback play was awful, comparatively speaking, even though the numbers were okay by the quarterback over there in Ohio State. So I think that's the great equalizer here. If it was a level playing field, if that was C.J. Stroud or Justin Fields, there wouldn't even be a question. And I think that's why people are looking towards the last 2 years, his freshman and sophomore year, more than last year, even though he put up pretty good numbers anyways.
Well, I think bringing up the Ohio State thing is key here because really, to me, I think this is what happens. This is what happens when we get bored, when the draft is close, and we don't have anything else to talk about. Marvin Harrison Jr. has been the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class for 2 years now, and it's just foregone conclusion. We did the same thing with C.J. Stroud last year with the S2 test, right? Like, oh, is Stroud going to go? Like, it's not exactly like that, but to me, it's kind of like that. It's like, we're just nitpicking at this point, trying to make things interesting because it's been Marvin Harrison Jr., and it will be Marvin Harrison Jr. until it's not Marvin Harrison Jr., as my friend.
Yeah. Trevor Sikkema, formerly of Locked On NFL, now the lead draft analyst over Pro Football Focus, friend of, the show, friend of Locked On still. He told me when he joined me last week, Marvin Harrison Jr. may be the highest graded player he's ever graded.
Right.
Regardless of position. So it's something that the name recognition, listen, you ask an 18-year-old who Marvin Harrison is, they're not going to know. Like, so Marvin Harrison Jr., right. Marvin Harrison, while being a part of the best 1-2 punch quarterback wide receiver in NFL history by a lot of metrics, and now that's obviously going to be overtaken. But he wasn't a big name wide receiver. It's not like Odell Beckham III or something like that where it'd make this huge waves. It's not because of the name recognition. It's because all he does is ball out. That's it. Right. So this is an absolute non-issue. Now, Tyler, really quick, I know we have a couple of minutes here. Slipping back, like you and I had this, I said that J.J. McCarthy was going to be the 4th pick overall 6 weeks ago. I mean, there's writing on the wall that there's always 4 quarterbacks up there. There was last year towards the top. Do you see a world, if there's no trade, where the Chargers pass on Marvin Harrison Jr.? Like, if you're the Chargers and you're offered Minnesota's package, if the Cardinals say no and they take Malik Neighbors, just say for an exercise, if the Chargers have the opportunity to take Marvin Harrison Jr. or trade back, is there a world where they trade back, having since given up their wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2?
It would be insane to. It would just be absolutely insane to. How could you do that when you have Marvin Harrison Jr. right there fall to you? Like, I just think that would be utterly insane considering their situation. And they have Rashawn Slater, a really good left tackle. They gave Trey Pipkins money. I mean, he's not awful, it's a good tackle draft. Like, you can get tackles later in the draft. If you're the Chargers, you got to take Marvin Harrison Jr. there. You simply can't pass on him. And they need to let Joe Alt go to the Titans anyway. So that needs to happen.
Here's the thing. Locked On NFL fans, lovers, you talk crap about us, I don't care. Collectively, as this family, we need to have a vigil ready if Joe Alt does not go to the Titans. Tyler Rowland will need to take a week off of his life if Joe Alt doesn't go to the Titans.
It'll be true sadness.
Because Rome Odunze is going to be there. Okay, Malik Neighbors may be there. We don't know. Right, but for you, for the Titans, before we get out of here, it's Joe Alt or bust, right? I mean, that's it. Because he would go top 3 if it wasn't quarterbacks.
Yeah, exactly. If the quarterbacks weren't going crazy in this draft, he would definitely be gone. So, I mean, that's just the best fit for the Titans. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, or Rome Odunze too. But Joe Alt is definitely at the top of my list, realistically speaking. But I'll be talking about that over on Locked On Titans. Alex obviously debating this decision with Marvin Harrison Jr. or what the Cardinals should do over on Locked On Cardinals. But that is going to do it for a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to tune in on Friday as well. As I tell you guys every week, though, start your weekend early. Stay safe out there.